Sometimes there are moments that seem normal, but suddenly turn into something unexpected. That morning, I never imagined how much everything would change. My name is Laura. I am 39 years old, and I recently married my husband Marco. He has a son from a previous marriage, Davide, who is just over 22 years old. He is a brilliant and respectful boy who moved to us to complete his studies. Over time, he became an important part of our extended family. It hasn't always been easy to adapt to this new life, but with patience and understanding, we have found our balance. Thursday morning, Marco had left early for a business trip, leaving Davide and me alone for the weekend. I had my favorite playlist playing in the background and had decided to dedicate myself to cleaning the house. Sunlight streamed in through the windows, illuminating every corner of the house with a welcoming warmth. It seemed like a perfect day to get things in order. I wore comfortable clothes, a light tank top and a soft skirt, ideal for moving freely. I knew Davide was home, but he usually slept late on weekends, so I was sure I would have a few hours of quiet. As I sang along to the music, I mindlessly dusted the living room, unaware that I was being watched. Suddenly, a movement to my left made me whirl around. David was standing at the entrance to the room, leaning against the door jamb, with a look I had never seen before. Surprised, almost intrigued, I smiled to chase away the embarrassment that had touched me. "Good morning, David," I said in a cheerful tone. He blinked, as if he had just woken up from a dream, cracking a sheepish smile. "Good morning," he replied, but his eyes lingered on me a little longer than usual before moving around the room. As I resumed my chores, I could still feel his gaze on me, and for some reason a little flutter went through my stomach. Maybe it was just the silence of the house, or the way the light made everything clearer, but I felt something different in that moment, as if we were sharing a little universe of our own. Continuing to clean, I noticed that Davide had come a little closer, his gaze attentive, as if he was really seeing me for the first time. I felt my cheeks heat up slightly, but I kept my tone light and started chatting about his classes, his plans for the weekend. He responded in short, thoughtful sentences, but seemed distracted. At one point, while trying to reach a picture frame on a high shelf, I reached down and my skirt lifted just a little. I turned to see Davide's reaction and found his eyes wide, which immediately lowered before he looked away. An unexpected shiver ran through me, a strange and new sensation that I couldn't ignore. Just then I lost my balance. I staggered, but before I could fall, I felt Davide's hands grab me firmly by the waist and put me back on my feet. His touch was firm but gentle, and when we looked into each other's eyes, everything seemed to stop. "Thank you," I whispered in a barely audible voice, softer than I had intended. Davide blushed slightly, but didn't immediately remove his hands. For a moment, his fingers lingered, and his gaze softened, filled with something I couldn't describe. "It's no problem," he replied slowly, in a small voice, as if he too was surprised by that moment. The air between us seemed thick, filled with a tension that neither of us could break. For the rest of the morning, Davide remained nearby, helping me with the cleaning. Every now and then, our hands touched, and every little contact, every involuntary glance, seemed to increase that subtle and unexpressed energy. When we finally finished, I suggested we take a break. We sat on the couch with 2 cups of cold coffee, both unusually quiet, as if we were still processing what had happened. "So, do you like these quiet Saturdays?" I asked with a light smile, trying to lighten the mood. Davide looked at me, his gaze sweet but intense. "Yes," he replied in a warm voice. "It's nice to be like this, just the two of us. My heart skipped a beat. His words were simple, but they hid a sweetness that went beyond. I looked at him, feeling the weight of that moment, as if we were trapped in a bubble of intimacy. "You're right," I replied softly. "Sometimes this house just seems too big." At that moment I realized how true it was. With Marco away, the empty space seemed amplified, yet together with David it was becoming something different, a place that we were filling with a silent but intense presence, a world of our own. His eyes looked at me a moment longer than usual. "You're right," he murmured. "Today, I feel different." He seemed to hesitate, as if he was choosing his words carefully, but then his expression softened as he continued. "It's like we're actually spending time together. We're not just bumping into each other." The warmth in his voice made me shiver, and I felt my heart speed up. We were there, alone, immersed in silence, as if every usual boundary had dissolved, leaving us to see each other in a new way, never discovered before. Every sip of coffee became a shared pause, every look a little spark. I leaned back, letting my arm lightly touch his shoulder. The contact was involuntary, but an electric shiver ran through the air. He remained still, as if he had felt exactly what I had felt too. Our eyes met, and without thinking, I smiled with a hint of mischief. "You're not usually this quiet," I teased, trying to ease the tension, but the warmth of his presence so close made it hard to ignore what I felt. "I left you speechless," he replied with a low laugh, his eyes shining with a disarming intensity. "Or maybe I see you differently today." His words hung in the air, and I felt a heat rise to my cheeks. I couldn't ignore the sweetness of the moment, so I just looked at him, searching for his gaze. There was something new in those eyes, a softness that made me catch my breath. With a nervous gesture, I tucked a lock of hair behind my ear. It was an instinctive movement, but he noticed it. Marco stretched out his hand, and with warm fingers touched mine. We remained there, hands clasped in a contact as simple as it was full of meaning. None of us moved, as if that moment were sacred, an invitation to recognize something new. "Laura," he whispered softly, and the way he said my name sent a shiver through me. I leaned forward slightly, captivated by his closeness, by the warmth between us. "Yes, Marco," I replied, my voice barely a breath, filled with all the emotions that I could no longer hold back. He paused, searching my gaze. I've wanted to tell you for a long time. I just didn't know how." His gaze never left mine, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. "You can tell me anything," I murmured, my voice shaking slightly. Marco took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "It's just, you mean so much to me, Laura, more than I can express. And today, here with you, I realized how important you are." A sweet smile emerged on my lips, as if those words had opened a door inside me. "I feel it too, Marco," I replied, letting the truth escape my lips. It was what I felt, and I finally didn't have to hide it anymore. He stepped closer, our faces separated by only a few inches, his hand still holding mine. "I've wanted to be close to you for so long," he whispered sincerely. "I don't want this moment to end." Everything seemed to stop. Every barrier fell, allowing only the truth of our feelings to emerge. I leaned forward, my heart pounding, as his face came closer to mine. His lips met mine in a tender kiss, filled with all the emotions we had held back for too long. Marco's fingers gently squeezed mine, as if he wanted to make sure I was still there with him. In that moment, the outside world seemed so distant, so small. There was only us, wrapped in perfect silence, in a shared rhythm of breaths and heartbeats. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair away from my face with a sweet, thoughtful gesture. "Laura," he whispered again, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes," I replied, searching his eyes, my heart pounding. "It feels like this moment has been waiting to happen forever," he said sincerely. "I know it's complicated, and I don't want to rush anything, but I want you to know how much I care about you, how important you are to me." My heart swelled as I listened to his words, and I instinctively squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine, a contact that seemed to give me stability. "I feel like you, David," I admitted in a small voice, barely a whisper. I hadn't expected it, yet it seemed so natural, so right. Our eyes met as he lingered in the living room, as if a silent understanding was passing between us, an unspoken invitation that needed no words. My hand, still clasped in his, squeezed slightly, and together we stood up. Nobody spoke, but every gesture seemed to say it all. Each step towards the corridor caused a silent shiver to grow, a simmering energy between us. The outside world seemed to fade away as we approached the bedroom. The gentle hum of the evening outside faded into the background as my heart beat faster and faster. His hand, firm and secure in mine, seemed to take me into uncharted territory. But the comfort of his presence swept away any remaining hesitation. David's fingers touched my arm, sending a shiver that warmed my soul. The room, illuminated by the soft glow of the street lamps outside, took on a new and intimate atmosphere. I felt a wave of warmth wash over me as he guided me to sit gently on the edge of the bed. There was something tender yet electrifying about the way he looked at me. His eyes followed every line of my face, as if he wanted to memorize every detail. Have you ever experienced a moment so intense that you felt like everything else was dissolving? Write in the comments. He knelt next to me, never looking away. "Laura, I've never felt this way before, not with anyone else," he murmured, with a sincerity that hit me straight in the heart. My pulse quickened. I rested my hand on his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin under my palm. "Me neither," I whispered, surprised by my own honesty. For a moment he rested his forehead on mine, his soft breath caressing my skin. I felt a deep and undeniable connection, as if all the moments spent had led us right there, to that perfect place outside of time. Without saying anything else, he leaned towards me and our lips met. The kiss was slow, full of emotion. As his hands found my waist, warm and safe, I gently brought him closer to me, and in that moment, the world outside the room stopped existing. It was just us, wrapped in the warmth of our touch. Suddenly, a noise broke the spell. The front door opened. The silence was overwhelmed by the sound, and my heart leapt into my throat. Marco was at home. Panic flashed in David's eyes. We walked away quickly, trembling, trying to compose ourselves while I rearranged my clothes with nervous gestures. I looked around, as if trying to erase any trace of intimacy that had just filled the space. I motioned for Davide to step back as I hurriedly opened the bedroom door, trying to appear calm despite my heart pounding in my chest. Marco's footsteps sounded in the corridor, getting closer and closer. I took a deep breath, praying he didn't sense the tension hanging in the air. He called me in a cheerful voice, unaware of the commotion that had just occurred. I responded firmly, walking out into the hallway where he greeted me with a smile and a distracted hug. Behind him, for a moment, I met Davida's gaze, who had retreated into the living room with an expression as tense as mine. The moment was over. The bond we had shared dissolved in the urgency of secrecy. Marco chatted carefree, talking about his day, unaware of what had happened. I answered as best I could, but my mind kept returning to those moments with David, moments that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. When Marco moved to the kitchen, I silently returned to Davide. He stood in the doorway, tense. We exchanged a quick glance, a tacit understanding, stronger than ever. We both knew we had to be careful, that the boundaries we had almost crossed could change everything. In the days that followed, the weight of that evening remained with me, a whirlwind of emotions of excitement, confusion, and guilt, each fighting for control. Davide and I kept our distance, but our bond never faded. It remained silent, hidden beneath the surface. One afternoon, while I was tidying up the house, Davide approached. His face was serious but calm. "Maybe we just let ourselves get caught up in a moment," he said, with a sweetness that took me by surprise. "We needed something, but maybe it doesn't have to be this way." I nodded, feeling his words bring me back to reality. "You're right," I replied softly. "I care about you, David, but I don't want to hurt the people we love. Maybe it's better to let this remain a good memory and focus on moving forward." He smiled at me, relieved, without tension or regret, just a deep and mutual understanding. At that moment, I understood that we had made the right choice. We had found something rare in each other, a closeness that didn't need to become anything else. Over time, everything returned to normal. We shared smiles, conversations, and laughter, but with a new respect, a hidden and secure bond. Looking back on that chapter in later years, I felt grateful, not for what could have been, but for what it had taught me, about myself, about human connection, and about the beauty of the relationships we choose to build. That moment had brought us together in a way that had strengthened the fabric of our family and given me a new appreciation for love and its unexpected forms. If you would like to see other videos from this series, write "I'm waiting for the next one" in the comments. If you found the video interesting, put a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next releases. Thank you so much.